Welcome back, my friends. If you are listening to this right now, that means you followed a prostate cancer link from the main tree, right? Jumped on a branch, and now we're going to be talking about prostate cancer. We're going to talk about my specific journey and what happened in my brain. And I'm going to have family members that want to come on and talk about the journey from their point of view. And I didn't have a normal journey, but I don't think anyone does. They call it a journey, I guess, for a reason, and we all are going to walk kind of down that same path. So mine actually started a few years ago. Elevated PSA was like 4.2, and the range, goes, hey, if it's 0 to 4, you're good. And for my age at the time, it was high. It was elevated. Well, they looked at the previous PSA, and it was 3.6. But then when it hit that 4.2, the next year it was like 4.6, and then it went to 5.2. The following year, it was 8.8. And I went to a different urologist. The first one that I went to left the facility that I was using. So he was gone. This new guy came in and he said, hey, I bet that 8.8 kind of woke you up a little bit, didn't it? I go, yeah. And he goes, so what are we going to do? And we started down that conversation of what do we do? And he said, well, the first thing is a DRE. We need to see if I can feel anything that is out of the ordinary with your prostate. And so he did that exam and he said, well, I think your prostate's a little swollen. What we're going to do is a CAT scan. So that'll give us an idea of what's going on to make sure it's not an infection, make sure it's not an enlarged prostate that, can also cause PSA numbers to jump. Sexual activity can make it go, vigorous exercise or whatever. But the reason your PSA is so stinking important is because they need a baseline. They need to know where it started. When mine went from 4.2 into the 5s, they sent me to the urologist and he said, hey, I don't feel anything. You're fine. Go. I said, okay. And he goes, we'll look at it next year. Well, he wasn't around after he did that, right? Because he took off. The new guy said, so now we have to figure out what we're going to do. And I said, well, you said I'm cool, right? Everything's fine? He said, I didn't say that. Have you ever had blood in your urine? And I said, yes, when I passed a kidney stone. He goes, how do you know you passed a kidney stone? If you've ever passed a kidney stone, you do know that you do. Right? You know it's happened to you. So there I was, and I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's when it happened. And he goes, how do you know? I don't know. What do I say? And he said, if you don't know, we need to find out what's going on. This is going to be something we're going to try to get you scheduled for an MRI, because now we need to get down to the nitty gritty, because the CAT scan said that, it was swollen and there was some stuff that they noticed. Kidneys and liver actually had little spots. But we went in and we decided now it's time for me to go in and have the MRI. And make sure, if you get to this point with prostate cancer and you're talking to your doctor and they say you've had a CAT scan or whatever, and they mention the word biopsy, okay, because biopsy will follow an MRI. It can also be the other way around. And I've seen people that have had the biopsy and then an MRI, and I said, never, never, never do you do that. Why? Good question. It's because the guided MRI biopsy is going to give you a lot more accurate results. If there is a mass that they're looking at, they can target that area because you'll do the MRI and it shows that you have a PIRAD 5 lesion that is big, and it's bulging on my prostate. And he said, we need to get a biopsy done like yesterday. Well, if you know anyone that's been through prostate cancer, or if you're going through it right now, a loved one's going through it, time stops because you're scared of these results, because an elevated PSI, hey, there's something wrong. And then the MRI said there's definitely something wrong. You have this lesion and it's a PIRAD 5. It's scored 1 through 4 or 1 through 5, 5 being, hey, it's a high probability that you have cancer. So shock number one. Well, then I go, so we do a biopsy and find out. Well, the thing is, in between each step can be weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks between procedures, and then however long it takes to get results. I was fortunate enough that February is when I found out. Surgery was at the end of August. And I say I was fortunate because I was told, hey, you know what? A PIRAD 5 lesion was the wake-up call. It was scary because you look that up and it says you're in trouble. A 4 says, hey, probability of cancer is there. When it hits the PIRAD 5, there's abnormalities that they see that you need to deal with. And so the biopsy is an experience all in and of itself. There's a couple ways they can do that. One way, and which is what I ended up with, they insert a probe into your rectum, and they have these long wires that run up into that probe, and it guides where it's going to go. So it goes snap, and that is the first snap of however many cores they're going to take. In my case, we had 18 cores. And so when you go in there and you have the MRI first, they line you up. The MRI is there and it superimposes their imaging that they're looking at the way you're lined up now. They get everything perfectly lined up and say, don't move. What they're doing is not one of those things that says, hey, don't move. And we can get through how all of these things happen. This is just a quick overview. So after the biopsy, you wait for reports, and the reports come back, and it said, hey, you have some stuff going on. 4-3, in that mass that we were looking at, that big PIRAD 5 lesion, 98% of the cores came back with cancer of a higher grade. And then the rest of the prostate had cancer. They went 3-3, 3-4, 4-3, trying to figure it out in different places within your prostate. Now, you have to remember, your prostate is the size of a walnut, and they're taking that wire and that little device, and they're going in and snapping just a little snapshot. It's a core sample of a very minute area of the prostate. Even when they do, multiples, they have to take those, gets to the lab looks at it. Now, I've heard of a lot of people doing the results from their labs come back and they send it for a second or even a third opinion to try to make sure they know what's going on. Because once your numbers come back and you get to see your scores and you go, man, my Gleason was a 4-3 with a higher possibility of ugly stuff. And they said they think it's contained in the prostate. And so what do you do? And I got a phone call that said, hey, we need to talk. You definitely need to have something done with this. That's no option. You're going to have to either have your prostate removed robotically, or you're going to have to go ahead and do radiation and then take your hormone shots and stuff so your testosterone is gone. They flatline you, and then they target where the beams are going to get you, and you go in, and it is your prostate and the prostate bed, because remember, prostate is sitting right underneath your bladder. And so the urethra runs through your bladder, obviously, or out of that, through your prostate, and then out of your body. And so as it's sitting down there in its little walnut shape, they're trying to go in there and get the beams so they can pop the prostate, but also the prostate bed, because that's where the lymph nodes and all of this stuff are, because that's the first place it usually creeps to, right? It gets into the lymph nodes. So you take all of this information and you decide what you're going to do. And sometimes they'll say, you know what, you're at a Gleason 6, you're a 3-3. We found cancer in 5% of the cores in this region, and it was 20%, or whatever the numbers are. And you, your doctor, your surgeon, everyone involved is going to give you a game plan, and you have the right to ask as many people their opinion on what you're going to do. Just be careful getting on Facebook's pages, or getting on some kind of chat deal and going, hey, what do you think? Because the people out there aren't doctors. They're dealing with their experience, and they're dealing with what they remember of what they heard or what they researched. Yes, what they remember from what they heard and what they read. And they can't give you a diagnosis or tell you what your plan should be, because as soon as the doctor says, it's definitely cancer, Steve, and you have a decision to make. It was a phone call. I was right out there in the carport, and I walked back in, and my wife looked up at me and said, oh, no. You can tell. You've been married 30 plus years. You can tell when the bad news hits. And so we talked through this, and we went through the whole process of what are we going to do. I will tell you, whatever you decide to do, there is going to be at some point in your recovery, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, you're going to wonder if you made the wrong choice. Sometimes it's not a choice. There was a lot of information being thrown around saying if you have radiation, you can't do surgery afterwards. And they said, why don't you do surgery? Because then if it comes back, you can go ahead and do radiation or chemo or whatever would happen to be, depending on where it goes. Because prostate cancer, if it's outside of the margins, that means they got your prostate and they got that mass that was on it, but there's some residual cells that were outside of the margin. And those cells at some point could go, hey, hello, and travel. People get cancer in their breastbone. They can get it in lymph nodes in their neck. It goes into the spine. It gets into other organs. It's still prostate cancer, but it's wherever it decides to end up. And they said, well, if you do surgery, then you can always do that. And you go, why don't you start with the radiation, and then that way there won't be anything left behind to do that? And I said, okay, but if your numbers start going up, is it because you still have a prostate and it's somehow still producing PSA? Because you remember, PSA started all of this. If it's gone, that PSA is not in your system. Once it's undetectable on your blood test at 3 months, at 6 months, when it hits undetectable, if you have surgery and it starts climbing, there is that possibility that cancer is going to come back and it's gonna smack you. Now, if you decide to have surgery and it comes back and you have to do radiation, it's in the prostate bed and it's in the lymph nodes, and you go, I could have prevented that if I would have done radiation first. Or if you do radiation, you go, now my PSA is crazy. What's happening? A PET scan. I didn't get a PET scan. And people said, are you serious? You made a decision without a PET scan. And I said, well, I had a bone scan. And it lit up in my shoulders, my hips, my knees, my right foot especially. And it was like, hey, you were, I was a typical kid growing up in the 70s and 80s. And we did things like jumping bikes off of rooftops. Okay, I never did that. I didn't even jump off the 2-story roof into the swimming pool. I got up there and said, you know what, there's a 95% chance I'm going to hit right where everybody else is hitting, right smack dab in the middle of the deep end, and I'm going to be fine. But there's a 5% chance I'm going to slip and I'm going to do a face plant into the cement off of a 2-story. I'm not doing it. And I went back down the ladder and they go, oh, really? And that lasted a couple of minutes and it was a whole lot better than doing that. But the funny thing is people on the backside of that go, no, I'm good. I'm not going to do it. Because one person decided that they were going to not jump. And you have people following you at that point. So telling you that story for no specific reason other than the fact that you have a choice to make and it's your choice. You're on the roof. Are you going to jump into the pool or are you going to go back down the ladder? But whatever you decide, you're going to get to the ground. Right? That just happens. Gravity takes over and you're going to get there, or you carefully climb back down the ladder. But at the end result is you're on the ground. So we've had surgery, we've had our chemo, we've dealt with all of the aftermath. And I'm telling you, the aftermath is crazy scary. But the worst part of this is the emotional journey that you are on. Because it was tough. My surgery was tough. I had complications that put me in the ICU and stayed in the hospital for a few days, got out, went home, got sick. I mean, really sick. And, I shouldn't be running 104 point anything temperature. And I would get out of bed and go into the bathroom and I would start shaking because I was getting cold, and I would get back into bed and it was like I was having convulsions. And for 30 minutes, I could not stop because my fever was crazy. And we went to the emergency room and they said, well, you know what? Zip, zip on the forehead and said, wait, we aren't seeing a big fever. It's probably the medicine and it took control. There's nothing wrong. Go home. Oh, wow, that kind of sucks. And so went back. My daughter took me back because I was sick. And they said, you know what? No, we're going to send you home. After being there both times for a couple hours, I was sent home. And then I saw my regular doctor and he said, what is going on? And I said, that's what I want to know. I'm not good, doc. I feel like I'm going to die. And he said, well, we need to get you to the emergency room and we need you to tell them that there is an order, that it's a stat order that I put in for you to have a CAT scan so we can see what's going on in your stomach because you have something wrong and it's bad. Come on, how bad can it really be? So my wife said, no, we're not going to wait. So we end up back at the emergency room and they said, oh, well, the fever thing that you guys are talking about. And I go, do you have a different thermometer? Because you guys are either using the ones that they stick in the little sleeve and they put it under your tongue and it goes beep. I mean, it's in there for, it seems like a nanosecond, right? I mean, it's not there very long. I put it in there, go beep. All right, you're at 99.8, but you know what? That's not a fever till it hits 100, so there's not a whole lot we can do. And I went, no, we need a different something. And they got one that went into the ear, and she pushes the button, and she goes, well, these are more accurate for what we're... She goes, I'll be back. It was 1:05 too many, and so things started going, and I ended up with the CAT scan, and they said, oh my gosh, you have this abscess that's like really big, and you need to get a drain put in. And so we got the drain put in, and this was complication of, hey, you're in the hospital for this, right? Because, oh my gosh, what is going on with this guy? We should probably figure this out. So they were running test after test after test on me. And if you look at my chart and you start scrolling, it says my results. To get back to the day of my surgery, you have to go through 7 pages of results. And the majority of those were done in that first week and a half after my surgery, because they didn't know what was going on with me. And I started doing that shaky thing again in the hospital at night, and this nurse came in and said, oh no. And they got a doctor, and they came in and they were doing their thing, and he said, we need to do another CAT scan. We're going to do one in the morning, first thing, because we think you may have another abscess, or the one that you have is not draining correctly or leaking, because we got a bunch out, and you're draining into this bag, but we need to check it out. Something else could be going wrong. And sure enough, I had another abscess in my stomach that they needed to get to, and they said, it's really, really deep. We're going to go through your back. And the other surgeon said, he has one in his belly, and now you want to put one in his back. He's not going to be able to sleep, because these drains, they just stick out. It's like your body's here and they're in, but it bends that way instead of being, I don't know, I'd put a 90 on it. Somebody should engineer something that's more comfortable. But anyhow, so my other doctor, the urologist, was actually at the hospital visiting me when I was having this procedure done with the second one. And he said, wow, could you see what he got out of that? And I said, no. And he goes, man, I don't know how you got this sick. Well, I was on liquid IV, stuff. They were giving me all kinds of stuff. And they said, antibiotics here, 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 here. And then they said, oh, crap. We have a problem. We shut your kidneys and liver down. Your red white blood cell counts are all out of whack. Everything is wrong at this point. We need to figure out what to do. So they stopped those immediately. And it was another few days before I got to leave the hospital with both ports. Had to go back and check those a couple times, and then they finally removed them. And so far, everything is almost back to normal. But that is a real quick overview. There's a lot of things that we need to talk about, which is why this is a breakout branch session. I'm going to invite my family, whichever members want to join us, to talk about their responsibilities and journey, or through this journey rather. So get that perspective of, what do your children go through mentally when you do this? How about your spouse? How about somebody? You have to have a support group. You have to have a support group with all of this. I will have links when I get this all figured out, so we can talk about my other podcasts that I co-host, and we're gonna do that. That's been going on, and it's specifically about prostate cancer and journeys, and we tell stories. But this is my personal story, and I just hit the tip of the iceberg. We're gonna talk about some stuff. It's gonna be real. It's gonna be hard at times, very emotional. If I lose it, if someone else does, and we have to just give them a second to get back, regain their composure and get their emotions under wraps, because this is a scary journey, and it's something that you can't do alone, and please don't do it alone. I have some help for you. We're going to assist you if you don't have that support group. I have a passion now to do this. When bad things happen, you get up and at some point you tell your story. And it's time for me to do that. Spent a lot of years in radio, a lot of time behind a microphone, and this is something on my heart that I have to do, and I'm doing it for you as well as therapeutically for me. So let's take this journey together, right? I'm here for you. Just understand that we're gonna do this, but it's something that I'm very, very passionate about. So just get ready for it, all right? Here we are. We are hcrd.online, and follow us, share us, just like us on all the social media links and pages, and Spotify has all of the stuff. You can follow along anywhere you listen to your podcast. We're there. Okay. So check it out. We will be back and we will continue this conversation. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. And like I said, we'll do it again.